the laughter was the worst part. Not the words, though the words were bad enough. It was the way Celeste laughed. Head thrown back, one hand pressed to her chest like she needed to hold herself together. Like the sight of Mira standing in the doorway of the Carrington Grand was the funniest thing she'd seen in months. And maybe to Celeste it was. Mira hadn't planned on being late. She'd taken the 6:15 train from Mississauga, changed twice on the TTC, and still arrived at the hotel with 7 minutes to spare. She'd stood outside on King Street for a moment, looking up at the glass and marble facade, the golden lettering above the revolving doors, the line of black cars idling at the curb. She'd smoothed her skirt, dark navy, knee-length, something she'd worn to her cousin's convocation, and walked in. The Carrington annual charity gala raised money for children's hospitals across Ontario. Mira's firm had been invited through a client connection. Her manager had handed her the invitation 3 days ago, like he was doing her a favor. "Good networking opportunity," he'd said. "Show your face, have a drink, make some contacts." She'd nodded and said thank you and spent 2 evenings worrying about what to wear. She chose the navy skirt and a cream blouse with a small pearl button at the collar. She'd borrowed her roommate's heels, block-heeled, sensible 2 inches. She'd done her hair in a low bun. She'd thought she looked fine. She hadn't counted on Celeste. Celeste was the kind of woman who seemed to materialize in rooms like this. Tall, angular, wearing a floor-length gown in deep burgundy that had clearly not come off a rack. Her dark hair was swept up with deliberate messiness. She had the look of someone who'd spent 4 figures, making herself appear effortless. She was standing near the entrance with 2 other women when Mira came through the revolving door, and the moment Celeste's eyes landed on her, something shifted in her expression. She didn't say anything right away. She waited. Watched as Mira crossed the marble floor toward the registration table. And then, loud enough to carry, she said, "Oh, sweetie, is this your first time at one of these?" Mira paused. She looked over. "I'm sorry?" "The gala." Celeste smiled. It was the smile of someone who'd been practicing condescension since early childhood. "It's a formal event. There's a dress code. It's on the invitation." She tilted her head slightly, taking in Mira's skirt, her blouse, her borrowed heels. "I'm not sure who gave you yours, but you might want to double-check the details next time." One of the other women pressed her lips together. The other looked away. A man nearby in a tuxedo pretended to study his phone. Mira felt the heat rise to her face. "I received the invitation from my firm, Walsh & Carver. I'm here representing." "I'm sure you are." Celeste cut her off with another smile, wider now. "It's just that this is a black tie event. And," she paused, letting her eyes travel downward one more time, "well, I think there might be some confusion about what that means." And that was when she laughed. The head thrown back kind, the hand-to-chest kind, the kind designed to draw attention from anyone in earshot. 2 couples nearby glanced over. A server slowed his pace. A woman in emerald green caught Mira's eye and immediately looked away. The way people do when they're embarrassed on someone else's behalf but aren't going to do anything about it. Mira didn't say anything. She wanted to. There were approximately 11 things she could have said, ranging from calm and professional to the kind of thing that would have felt satisfying for about 30 seconds, and then catastrophic. She said none of them. She turned back to the registration table, gave her name quietly to the young man behind it, accepted her lanyard and her table card, and walked into the main ballroom. Her hands were steady, her face was not. The ballroom was extraordinary, which somehow made everything worse. 30-foot ceilings hung with crystal chandeliers. Round tables draped in ivory linen, each one centered with tall white floral arrangements that smelled like something expensive. The room hummed with the particular sound of a certain kind of money. Low voices, the clink of crystal, a string quartet playing softly near the far windows that looked out over the lake. Mira found her table, number 14, tucked near the middle of the room. She sat down. She straightened her fork. She told herself to breathe. The thing about being mocked in public is that the moment expands. It stretches out and fills the space around you, and suddenly you are aware of every person who might have heard, every face that might have seen. You replay it in your head, the exact inflection, the exact pause, the way the laughter landed, and you try to calculate how many people witnessed it, and whether any of them will be at your table, and what they must think of you now. Mira was doing all of this when the man sat down across from her. He was older. late 50s, maybe 60, with silver hair and the quiet, settled look of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove anything. He wore a dark suit that was clearly well made but not showy. No pocket square, no cufflinks that announced themselves. He poured himself a glass of water from the carafe on the table and looked across at her with an expression that was straightforward and kind. "You look like you could use 5 minutes of not thinking about whatever you're thinking about," he said. Mira blinked. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's spent 30 years in rooms like this. He extended his hand across the table. "Douglas, Mira." She shook it. "First time at the Carrington Gala? That obvious?" He smiled. "Not at all. I just ask everyone." She wasn't sure whether she believed that, but she appreciated the effort. He turned out to be easy to talk to. The kind of person who asked real questions and actually listened to the answers, which was rarer than it should have been at events like this. He asked about her work. She told him about the environmental compliance consulting she did, the municipal water files, the provincial assessments. He asked good follow-up questions. She started to relax. She didn't ask what he did. She'd learned, over years of being young and female in professional settings, not to lead with that. People either told you or they didn't. He didn't tell her. Celeste arrived at the table 20 minutes later. She swept in with the two women from the entrance, pulling out her chair with the brisk confidence of someone used to taking up space. She looked at Mira, and for a moment something flickered across her face. A recalibration, a reassessment, but it passed quickly, replaced by the same smooth, practiced smile. "Small world," she said, sitting down. Mira said nothing. She reached for her water. The dinner was 4 courses, which meant 4 courses of Celeste performing. That was the only word for it. She performed for the table, speaking loudly about her board positions, and her recent trip to Portugal, and the renovation happening at her place in Rosedale. She name-dropped with the ease of someone who'd been doing it so long she didn't notice anymore. She was charming to the men at the table, and subtly dismissive of the women. Particularly any woman she'd decided wasn't worth her attention. Mira was clearly in that category. Twice during the meal, Celeste made comments in Mira's direction. Small ones, the kind that could be passed off as jokes if anyone pushed back. Once about the blouse, very classic, very school year. Once about Mira's salad choice. "Oh, are you one of those?" Both times Mira felt the table hold its breath slightly, the way tables do when someone is being unkind, and everyone knows it and no one wants to be the one to say so. Douglas said nothing either. He ate his dinner and listened, and occasionally asked someone a question that redirected the conversation. Mira noticed that Celeste spoke to him with a slight increase in warmth. Not much, just enough to suggest she sensed he was someone worth cultivating. But she clearly didn't know who he was either. Nobody at the table seemed to. After the main course, Celeste excused herself to visit another table across the room. Mira watched her go, then looked down at her plate. "She does that at most of these," Douglas said quietly. "You're not the first." Mira looked up. "Do you know her?" "I know the type," he said. He wasn't unkind about it, just matter of fact. They mistake access for authority. It's a common confusion. He paused, then added, "You're doing good work, by the way. The municipal water assessments. The province should be doing more of them." Mira stared at him. "How do you?" But Celeste was coming back, and Douglas picked up his wineglass and turned to the man on his left, and the moment passed. The speeches started at 8:30. There were 4 of them, a hospital administrator, a city councillor, a local philanthropist who'd been involved with the gala for 15 years, and then a 4th speaker that the MC introduced simply as our founding patron and the reason this evening exists. That was when Douglas stood up from table 14. He buttoned his jacket, straightened slightly, and walked up to the podium with the same unhurried, unremarkable ease with which he'd done everything else all evening. There was a ripple of sustained applause. Real applause. The kind that comes from genuine respect rather than social obligation. And Mira sat very still in her chair. She understood, now, the follow-up questions about municipal water assessments. She understood the quiet authority he'd carried all evening without doing anything to display it. She understood why Celeste had calibrated slightly warmer toward him, without knowing why. Douglas Carrington. His family had built the hotel. He'd established the Gala 22 years ago, after his youngest daughter was treated at Sick Kids. He had given, over 2 decades, more money to children's healthcare in Ontario than some mid-sized corporations. And he had spent the dinner asking Mira about her work. Celeste had gone very still. Mira didn't look at her. She looked at the podium, at Douglas, who spoke for 7 minutes without notes, and said things that were simple and genuine and made 3 people at nearby tables quietly reach for their napkins. He talked about a little girl who was now 24 years old and had just been accepted to medical school. He talked about what it meant to invest in the people who would solve problems the current generation couldn't imagine yet. He talked about gratitude. When he finished and the applause came again, he walked back to table 14. He sat down. He picked up his water glass. Celeste leaned forward. Douglas. Her voice had shifted entirely, warm now, almost deferential. I had no idea you were I've heard so much, obviously, I just didn't. It's a big room, he said pleasantly. Of course, yes, and your work is just. The hospital programs especially, my firm has actually been discussing a potential. Send something in writing to my office, Douglas said. Still pleasant, completely non-committal. He turned back to Mira. Were you able to catch the part about the cardiac unit expansion? I'd be curious what you think from an infrastructure standpoint. Mira had caught it. She told him what she thought. Celeste sat back in her chair. The coffee came, and then the dessert. Individual pavlovas with passion fruit and fresh cream. The kind of thing that looked like a lot of effort had been involved. And the conversation at table 14 redistributed itself. People talked across each other, switched partners, the way dinner conversations do in the last hour of a long evening. At some point, Mira went to find the washroom. She took the long way back, along the windows, because the view of Lake Ontario at night from that height was genuinely beautiful, and she'd spent most of the dinner not enjoying it. The city reflected on the water. A few lights from Hanlon's Point, distant and small. She stood there for a moment. She heard Celeste's heels on the marble before she heard Celeste's voice. Mira. Not a greeting, exactly. More of an announcement. Mira turned. Celeste looked different from earlier. Still polished, still composed, but something had shifted. The performance had dialed down slightly. She was holding her clutch with both hands in a way that seemed less than entirely casual. I wanted to apologize, she said. Mira waited. What I said when you came in. That was. Celeste paused. That was unkind and unnecessary, and I'm sorry. For a moment, Mira didn't say anything. She was thinking about the laughter, the head thrown back, the hand on the chest, the 2 couples who'd glanced over. She was thinking about 7 courses of small cuts, the comments about her blouse and her salad, and the general implication that she didn't belong. She was also thinking about the fact that Celeste was apologizing here, in a quiet corner by the windows where no one else could see or hear, the same place where there had been no audience to perform for. I appreciate that, Mira said finally. Celeste nodded. She seemed to be waiting for something. Absolution, maybe, or a reciprocal gesture, or some indication that the ledger was now balanced. Her eyes moved very briefly in the direction of the room, where Douglas was visible at table 14, laughing at something the man beside him had said. You've met Douglas before? Celeste asked. She tried to make it sound casual. Tonight was the first time, Mira said. He seems quite taken with your work. Mira looked at her. I think he's genuinely interested in the municipal water file. It's an underfunded area. She paused. That's actually why I'm here. The firm has been trying to expand into infrastructure philanthropy consulting. It's slow work, not a lot of glamour in water treatment. There was a silence. No, Celeste said. I imagine not. Mira nodded once politely. Enjoy the rest of your evening. She walked back to table 14. She didn't think about it as a victory. That wasn't quite the right word for how it felt. Douglas asked for her card before he left. A real card exchange. The kind where someone actually means to follow up, not the performative version. And he said he'd have someone from the foundation reach out about the infrastructure consulting. That there were 3 hospital expansion projects in the planning stages that could use exactly the kind of assessment her firm did. She thanked him. She meant it. On the way out, she retrieved her coat from the cloakroom and walked through the revolving door onto King Street. The October air was cold and clean and smelled faintly of the lake. She thought about the train back to Mississauga, the platform, the familiar ride home through the dark. She thought about the moment she'd walked in. She hadn't changed anything about herself between that moment and this one. She'd worn the same skirt, the same blouse, the same borrowed heels. She'd sat at the same table, eaten the same dinner, had the same quiet conversations she'd have had anywhere. She hadn't proven anything to Celeste. She hadn't tried to. She thought about what Douglas had said at dinner, that people mistake access for authority, that it was a common confusion, and she thought maybe the same confusion ran in the other direction too, that dignity wasn't something other people could revoke, that the laughter in the lobby had been loud and public and humiliating and had also, ultimately, said nothing true about her at all. She pulled her coat closed and walked to the station. The city moved around her the way cities do, indifferent and alive, and full of people carrying their own private weight from one place to another. The train came. She found a seat by the window. The lights of the downtown core pulled away behind her as the train moved west, and she leaned her head back and let herself feel, for the first time since she'd walked through those revolving doors, the specific relief of having simply been herself without apology, in a room that had briefly tried to tell her she had no right to be there. It wasn't triumph. It was quieter than that. It was enough.